Hello everybody, welcome back to another Java lesson. Today we're going to be going over loops and arrays, and I taught a little bit of this during a meeting, but we weren't able to get really too in-depth into things. So today I'm going to go over everything in really extreme detail. This is going to definitely be a little bit of a longer unit. It's going to be really chock full of problems to do. I'm going to start adding more. I do have some up on the GitHub right now if you have looked there, and you should start working on those after this video, but I'll definitely give more to come because this is one of the last big things that you need to know for Java basics. So I'm going to pretend like I didn't teach anything inside the meeting, and I'll just go over everything just in case anyone wants to do this asynchronously. However, I'll start adding timestamps in the video so that you can navigate to things much easier. So if you already know something, skip to the timestamp of something you don't know. So let's get started with arrays. So what is an array? An array is a way of holding a bunch of things, aka primitives or objects, under one name. For example, if I wanted to access the numbers 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, etc., or just numbers in general or strings, I would have to, until I use arrays, make a single variable for every single one of them, which isn't necessarily good. It looks ugly. It's this big chunk of just names that you make. You might run out of names to name them, and it might get confusing later on in the code. So the way we get around that, if you're accessing a bunch of or related data, is by putting it into an array. Think of an array as like a container. There's a container with a name, and it has all this information, and you can take out the information when you want and what information you want if you know where it is. So how you make an array is really similar to how you make a primitive, except you add these square brackets right here. So I know there's a lot of stuff on the screen right now. Don't worry about copying it down. I'm going to go through each one procedurally. So to make it an array, all you do is you say the name of the primitive or object you want to create. You add these opening and closing square brackets. Then you give it a name, of course, as we do for all objects. And then you say equals. And then this is similar to object creation, in which we use the keyword new. Just remember, like scanner, we create a new scanner. Except this time you're creating new, and then you give it the same int bracket bracket, but there's a number in here. Now what this number is it is the size of the array. So think of arrays as like jars. They can only hold so much data, and if you have something that stores a lot of numbers, you need a bigger jar. So you need to tell that array, like, yo, you need to be this long, or you need to hold this much information, essentially. So this piece of this array can hold 5 pieces of data. Hence why it has a length of 5. And as of right now, it is empty because there is nothing in it. Now that is one way to create arrays. So that's array creation way 1, and then array creation way 2 is going to be this. And I named it my array 2, of course. The left side is the exact same with the int bracket bracket and my array. However, the right side has these curly braces, and these curly braces hold numbers within them. And what are those numbers? Well, that's the information that goes into the array. What you do is you just say the number, comma, number, comma, number, comma, and so on and so forth. You don't need to specify a length because obviously the length is given by how many numbers you have in this array. If I was to cut this down to one number, this array would be of length 1, as in there's one element in here, and it holds in that one element of the array the number 0. So how do arrays actually store this data, and how do you access it in code? So on the computer side and memory side, you don't really have to worry about that right now. That's kind of beyond the scope of this video. But what you do have to know for accessing it in code is that arrays are 0 based, as in the first thing in the array, whether that's a string, an integer, an object, is considered the 0th index. It's the first element, as in the first thing in the array. However, it exists at index 0. So if I say, oh, get the 0th thing in the array, it will give me the first thing in the array. If I say, get me the element at index 1, it'll get me the second thing in the array. And you can see that in this little comment I put under here. This is indices. So when I refer to an index, it means literally if I say get me the 0th index or the second index, it'll get me that plus 1, if that makes sense, because the 0th is considered the first thing. So if I access index 2, I'm going to be getting element 3. For example, this right here, the 0, is the first element. This is the second element. This is the third element. But to get the third element, I will be accessing index 2. So how does this work out in like actual code? To set and or access things, what you need to do is you need to say the name of the array and then in brackets, just put the number that you want to alter. So if I wanted to simply access and print out something, for example, let's do sysout, and then I want to print out the number, I want to print out the number 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my array 2, because this my array 2 has some data in it, and then I'm going to say, okay, I want to print out 3. It is 0, 1, 2. It's the third index, but it's the 4th element. So if I want to print out 3 there, let me just get rid of all these other prints so they don't clog up the... As you can see, it prints out 3. So this right here is how you access the data. And how you set these things, for example, if you do array creation way number 1, and you don't have any information in the array, you need to set values. So how you do that is you say my array 0 equals, and I can set this number to 77, I can set this to 22, I can set this to 12, I can set this to -15, and I can set this to 0. So now I have a quick question for you guys. So pause the video right here and see if you can figure out what the result of me putting this in will be. Okay, I'm going to run it. -3. So if you said -3, you're correct. Because 12 plus -15 is -3. And 12 is the third element, second index. 1, 2, 3, third element. However, it is the second index. And of course, my array 3, third index, 4th element, -15. So say you want to know how long an array is, and this is a method. Think like string methods. This is an array method that is actually really widely used, and you'll see why later when we get into for loops. But if you want to get the length of an array, you just say myArray.length. Something unique about this is you actually don't put the parentheses around here. It's not technically really a method per se. It's something else. But all you need to know is that you don't need the brackets around it. Or like not the brackets. You don't need the parentheses like you would if you were calling .equals or another string method. So if I run this, it'll say the length of my array. See, my array is of length 5, which is the exact same number we put in here earlier. Okay, that is all we need to do for arrays, I believe. Oh, and one last thing that is actually relatively important. If you want to visualize the array, say you populate an array with data, but you do it in a way that you actually can't directly see it, because you'll rarely be doing this, and say you get some information from an external source and you put it into array. And just for debugging purposes, you want to print that out to the console to see what's in your array. Because maybe you're getting some funky data and you're wondering if you put some number in wrong. What you do is you actually have to type in arrays.toString and then put an opening parenthesis and then put the name of your array inside that parenthesis, closing parenthesis, and then closing for the print line and then a semicolon. What this does, this arrays.toString, it's a method of the arrays class, which we will need to import as you see at the top here. And the arrays class just lets you operate on arrays and do things to them that are usually difficult to code in yourself, but they have it built into Java, so you can do it really easily through the arrays class. And if I was to print out my array, just like that, like, oh, I'm printing out like a string, or you're printing out like another primitive, what you'll get instead is something really funky. And I believe this has to do with like the memory address of the array, which for now isn't very useful. So if I wanted to visualize my array, which remember is this, it comes out looking like that, with this being the 0th index and this being the 4th in this case, and the 5th element in the array. And if you have like a bigger array, it'll go on like this, Okay. So that is everything for one-dimensional arrays. While we're on the topic of one-dimensional arrays, let's get into, this is a little bit more complicated, but I'm sure you guys get it. Something called two-dimensional arrays. And now the creation of two-dimensional arrays, let's go over that first, is genuinely not terribly different from the creation of one-dimensional arrays. But to get this in your heads early, a two-dimensional array essentially is an array that holds a bunch of arrays which hold information. So, for example, I have my 2D array, and instead of putting one bracket, I just put two brackets. And when I say new int, I put another two bracket pairs, and I fill each one in with how much I want that to hold. So the important thing to remember about 2D arrays is that this first number is the rows, and that second number is the columns. And I'll explain exactly what I mean by rows and columns through the second example, which is the second way of creating arrays. In that, so the amount of rows is the amount of arrays within the bigger array. For example, this whole thing, my 2D array 2 is an array. It is an array. However, what it stores is other arrays, if that makes sense. So this right here, this array of 1, 2, 3 is an element in my bigger array. And that right there, this thing right here, there is 1, there is 2, and there are 3 sub-arrays in my larger array. That is the amount of rows I have. What that means is that there are this number right here, right? Rows. If my 2D array, if I was to populate it, I would have to give it 5 sub-arrays within my bigger array. And each sub-array holds that many columns. Now, if I was to make this, what this basically means is a 5x5 grid. My 2D array is a 5x5 grid. It has 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means 5 sub-arrays, and in each sub-array, there are 5 elements. My 2D array 2 is something called a jagged array. And you can really only make these through creation like this or some programmatic generation. But why it's called a jagged array is because the column numbers aren't uniform. As you can see, the first array has 3 elements in it. The second array has 4, and the third one has 2. So I can access the third element in this array, but I can't access it in the last array. I can access the 4th element in the second array, but I can't access the 4th element in the first or last arrays because it doesn't exist. So jagged arrays aren't something you'll see super often, but I just wanted to give you guys an example of it and let you know that they do exist. So that's how 2D arrays work. Essentially, it is an array that stores more arrays within it. And we'll get into how to use these later on. But as for now, all right, so I'm gonna go over how to access 2D arrays now. So first, let me put a little sys out here. So one thing about 2D arrays is that you can think of them almost like a Cartesian plane, kind of. You can think of it like a X and Y axis almost, but instead dealing with rows and columns. It's like a grid. You can kind of like map it out. Oh, I want to go down this much and right this much. Say I want to access the number 7. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? First, obviously, I want to write down my 2D array 2, right? And what I want to do in this is give the row number of what I'm looking for and the column number. So if you look here, it is in the second row. 7 is in the second row because it is in the second sub-array. But what that means is I put in the number 1 here because this is the 0th sub-array. This is the first sub-array. Even though it's the second row, it is the first index, which means that I will put in number 1 here. And now we can just focus on this subarray right here. And we can see that's the 0th index, the first index, second index, the third index. So it's in the fourth column because that's the first column, second column, third column, fourth column, but it is the third index. So if I put 1, 3 here within the little brackets, and I print this out, I should get 7. Ta-da, I got 7. So that's how you access 2D arrays. So now, if you want to, you can take a break. I believe I'm going to be splicing the videos here. So I'm going to put it into just an arrays video, and I'm going to turn it into a loops video, although the two are very closely connected. So you can take a pause here. You can't really answer any of the problems yet, so maybe just get some food, come back when you're ready. But yeah.